So first of all, let me thank you all for taking part in this effort to create a meaningful dialogue between designers and manufacturers. Hopefully, this will lead to more cross-industry discussions.
Robert Norwood, Interior Design Principal and BBJ in the Los Angeles studio.
I'm Jordan Goldstein. I'm Global Director of Design at Gensler.
Kent Pedersen, I'm the President and CEO of Poulsen USA.
Clayton Whitman, Senior Interior Designer, Associate Principal at CallisonRTKL, New York City.
Jason Heredia, Vice President of Product and Design for H&I Corp, which is Gunlocke, Allsteel, Han, etc.
My name's Kirt Martin. I'm with Landscape out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and my title is Chief Creative Officer.
How are you all keeping projects moving today in this new normal? What are the challenges? What are the learns? And what do you think this experience has strengthened your team?
We worked ahead to get people that weren't set up from a technology standpoint, set up with laptops and appropriate equipment. So, you know, when we switched to a work from home strategy, you know, people were connected. And, you know, we went from 50 offices globally to 6,000 plus offices globally because everyone's sitting in their houses. Some of the things I find that have been really interesting as lessons learned is like, is design can still happen. Projects can still start up, projects can still continue. And it really relies on the creativity of all these individuals to figure out what's the tools in their digital toolbox that will help support the process moving along. Whether it's the video technology and the web technology that we're using, but also how do you collaborate on design, when all those voices are no longer around the same table, they're all at different tables, but bringing that together to truly go for one common goal. And I think that's been really inspirational to see.
There is this thing, it's tough. I don't know if other people feel this. I'm booked nonstop because people feel the need to use the video tool almost too much. Like that informal conversation that used to take 3 seconds in the hall, all of a sudden now it's a 15, 20, 30-minute call block. So I'm really trying to encourage people to say, just do ambient, pick up the phone calling like you would talk to me in the hall versus try and schedule blocks of time. Blocks of time are about creating, deciding, debating. They're not just about one way. And we tend to be using this thing called Miro, which is an online whiteboard. We've been using it for a while for our research side. And we've all kind of gone into it now for collaboration to try and recreate that creative moment. So
our Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou offices, obviously they forecasted this and we're kind of watching how it ebbs and flows, and they're on a 50% return already. So obviously while they were undergoing all that, we were helping carry those offices through, and now it's our turn. So they're actually coming back online and projects are speeding ahead over there. So we're actually partnering with our offices over there and doing a lot of work with them. So that's helping kind of broaden our resources and opportunities to work with them. And it's also fostering some fun new collaboration with offices and teams that we normally haven't.
Yeah, I was going to add, Beth, one of the things that I've found really fun is like, since we're no longer able to kind of roam the offices and see work, on people's screens or hanging on walls, how do you see work? And we created this book. We've now published 2 volumes of it internally called Homework. And it's basically just asking people to pull off, right, whether it's off their kitchen table or off their computer screen, what's happening, from a design standpoint.
I have encouraged our designers over the last few years to really think about speaking in the language of our clients, specifically entertainment and technology. The tech clients were far ahead of us in terms of meeting virtually. LinkedIn, for example, one of my primary clients, it is their culture to work and speak this way. It took us a little bit of time to sort of get up to that speed. And I have to say that I think that now that we're doing that, our communication is much more streamlined with them. At the same time, it's the FaceTime, it's the immediate FaceTime that everyone seems to be missing. And that's spoken of frequently.
For new buildings in the future, what effects do you think this pandemic will have on space density, space layout, and space utilization? What effects will this have on the role or expectations of indoor, outdoor, and public spaces?
It's a conversation recently had with LinkedIn, where over the last 2.5 years of working with them, the strategy was to see how many sardines you can get into the can, because they were onboarding 40 plus people a week in the South Bay campus. The question started to arise, is this the way that people want to work, the way that they want to work efficiently? We're working on a master plan for them right now on the campus. They're in the South Bay. There's about 18 plus buildings or so, of thinking exactly the opposite. How do we begin to sort of spread people out? And that actually started to happen before the pandemic started. It was a matter of how do we get comfort among ourselves? Now, our next step is how do we potentially bring people outdoors? That's not possible everywhere, but certainly in the South Bay, South San Francisco Bay Area, it is possible. So we're looking at ways to bring larger scale meeting spaces outdoors, so that there's larger congregations of people, let's say 15 or more, can have a little bit more space. The air can be moving around. We're not relying on building infrastructure and HVAC systems to kind of clean the air up. So it's part of a strategy to think about how to go outdoors, how to be outdoors. And we all know that being closer to nature is one of the things that stimulates brain activity and makes us think more clearly and more healthfully. So there's a potential benefit that's coming from this as well.
I completely agree. One of our fastest growth segments in terms of our business has been outdoor structures that facilitate learning and meeting and support technology outdoors. Just before the pandemic was, to use a lightning in a bottle, for lack of a better term. Now I think it's going to really explode. And so as an organization, we've pulled together a multidisciplinary brainstorm team, or a team to look at growth opportunities through this pandemic, or through this kind of space that we're in. So it's going to be interesting. We see a huge upside in it, and always have, obviously. I always ask people, if the outdoors is an afterthought, why does it matter when it comes time to your vacation, right? It's interesting when people think about the most valuable time that they might have in their calendar year, there's a strong connection to nature, but somehow during the workday, we forget about that. And so I think, if anything, this will help us look at all of the real estate as usable, or all of the square footage as usable square footage in any project, which is exciting to me.
I think it's a great point. I think that that's going to bring up what I guess I would call trust in architecture that's going to need to happen, that people are going to feel like they can have a trust in the places and spaces that they go into post-pandemic, whether it's the furniture, whether it's the interior architecture, et cetera, that can support gathering, but yet safety. And how do we do that in a way that the materials, the finishes, the technology that's woven in, and then the architecture and building components all kind of work together in a new recipe that allow people to really have faith in the places that they're in, but yet those places don't want to be clinical. They still want to be operational.
We've been kind of wondering what the reaction is going to be about social cafes. Are people going to want to, be craving the collaboration and the interpersonal kind of interaction, or will they be straying away from those kind of areas and creating them more sparse? And what kind of physical things do we do to those areas? Do we, even on our immediate return, alleviate some of the furniture in these social areas, eliminate any kind of shared workstations? So some immediate things like that obviously will then influence, I think, the future of workplace as well.
It's really interesting to think about spaces differently. And we've been a strong, we've never really embraced work from home, just culturally, just that has not been our thing. And now we anticipate up to 60% of our workforce working from home going forward for the next 6 months to a year. And this is something that we've learned through this kind of crisis, is that we can be productive from home and we can work together. So culturally, we're learning and changing and adapting. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, we look at this when you're back into kind of 3 buckets right now. One is this cleanability germ factor we're all going to go through. and there's going to be this debate about antimicrobial, and, that's a red thing, material that we morally are kind of opposed to, but yet there's a tension on that. The second bucket is going to be this social distancing, and it kind of plays out in I space and we space. There's lots of cool things on the we space side, whether it's outdoor, indoor, that you can start to get into just as much as I space. Layering becomes an interesting discussion on that one, taking cues from like subway cars where you're standing versus seated all the time to reduce your amount of interaction in the space. And the third one is this work remote. And that's two ways. That's not only the people at home, there'll be a certain amount of the population that just stays home, is one of our beliefs, but also you need to support those people now when you're in the space. So just about like this retrofit of sneeze guards. In that last topic of remote, we're seeing retrofit of people who never use distance collaborative tools, all of a sudden are struggling with it. Like, where do I stick the mic? How's the battery? Where do I put the camera? I'm not lit correctly. I'm distracted by my own image. So that third category is actually fairly interesting, just because of, a lot of the leading edge clients like NBBJ and LinkedIn, we're already all over this, but now the average person's going through this for the first time ever in their workplace. And that's really interesting. So we kind of divided into those three buckets. And then my last comment is there's a really interesting set of tensions going on, that the amount of money the business had spent per person, dollars in real estate, was fixed. And so as much as they want to do all these new things like social distancing, there's a great one of the 6-foot office that's been floating around, right? Well, that's great, except I don't have that money and I don't have that real estate. So that tension is going to be a fun one for us all to get creative about. And that's expanding our envelope of how we do the distancing, basically.
We did do a study back in 2016 where we visited some landscape architects and line designers in general, where we kind of talked a little bit about trends of the future. And it was interesting to hear some of the comments today, because these are some of the comments we got back then, was the taking the office outside, creating these meeting spaces, creating hookups outside, for computers and whatever have you. Also in New York City, we heard quite a bit about rooftop developments, being taken on more and more, just for people to be able to get outside as well. So it's kind of interesting to hear, but the other thing that I think today now we're seeing is that how many people in the future are going to start, our companies having a large part of their workforce actually working from home, because I think we are learning a lot today, and I think we're getting better and better as we progress. Of course, we are in front of the computer all day long and having all these different conversations, but I think we are learning that we don't necessarily need these big office spaces, and I think that's a big benefit, I think, for everybody.
In what ways are you looking to bring these qualities, along with meeting performance, aesthetic, and sustainability considerations, to indoor and outdoor workplace solutions? And, long question, how would you change your conversation with your clients about improving material health?
Implementing any kind of these technologies or smart materials, antimicrobial, as people were talking about earlier, and just making those the new standard practices, or doing, we always say at CallisonRTKL that for LEED, we always implement our best practices and using those sustainable materials, whether it's a LEED project or not. So I think maybe towards the beginning of this, maybe some of those finishes might be more expensive, but I think soon after it'll become more mainstream and incorporated for having those copper and silver materials into work surfaces and different air filtration systems and the HVAC. So I think a lot of those standards will just become more common play as this plays out.
It really speaks to a call to arms for invention, a change in the way in which we're thinking about materiality, and also for inventors to think about what things actually could become the new real, not just, as Clayton points out, what is LEED, what was LEED, is it a cultural movement? But I think there's something more to be said about it at this point. And who out there can take us to the next level of thinking? And it's not just about the Band-Aid of here's what we have at this moment, we can implement it now. It really is a question of what's next.
Yeah, we're really struggling, like I mentioned, with the cleanability thing. You know, kind of our position right now is we certainly will take requests for people who want antimicrobial surfaces or healthcare vinyls put on things. But our position is we prefer much more just to talk about simple cleanability, you know, and reducing the touch points. So for example, touch latches on doors versus handles, if possible. Non-hand ways to open things is an interesting discussion, you know, whether it's foot
For
latch.
sure.
For our company, being that we're outdoor people, we're actually quite lucky because, you know, the things we typically worry about are sunshine or UV rays, which fades product. We have to look at water resistance, and we have to look at temperatures. If someone sits down on a table and it's too hot, say in Arizona, it can be a problem. But through this, we're actually kind of thinking about it differently, thinking how do we partner with those elements in nature? So can we find materials that once UV rays hit them, they actually kind of activate, or can we let temperature be our best friend in terms of killing germs? What can we do with rain? So it's actually, instead of resisting nature, like leveraging that as an organization, because being an outdoor company, could be quite cool. The other thing to add on to what Jason was saying is how do we design product that maybe isn't so prescriptive? So for example, a park bench, they're usually designed with 3 people in mind, and we know that 3 people, if they don't know each other, will not sit on a park bench together. And then it has arms in the middle, or it has arms on the end, and those are touch points. The reality is things don't need to be that prescriptive. They could be a little bit more vague in terms of its use, or the narrative around how you interact with these objects could be a little bit looser. So it's open to interpretation, which then helps people it relieves the social anxiety, because if, say, Jason's sitting on one end of the bench and I'm on the other, it might feel a little awkward. Or if there is no end of the bench, it isn't awkward, because wherever you interact with this piece of furniture, it begins to make sense. So can we design in a clever way? Or for example, can we create tables that keep you 6 feet away from side to side, face to face? So in my mind, this is really a fun time if you're really thinking about it from a creative standpoint.
Not to dominate, jump in. Kirt, we came up with this cool word. You know, in the factory, we have this thing called poka-yoking, which is you're designing the process that you can't put the part in the wrong way. So you're physically doing something, they can't make a mistake in the line. And we said, well, what would it look like if we poka-yoke the social distancing in the space? And so, for example, imagine a private office with a traditional like P-top return. Well, what if we cut out the P-top to be fixed, but the credenza was the adjustable piece? So that way your visitors were always 3 feet from you no matter what. It kind of pushed you away. And so how do we poka-yoke the social distancing into the space like you were describing on the benching, so that there's not a choice anymore? It's kind of done for you.
It really sets up an interesting opportunity and a challenge for designers all over the world to think about, you know, what are the new ingredients, you know, both the, you know, manufactured materials, the building components, and the technology, and how do they all kind of swim together in a new recipe for, you know, this new reality. You know, pre-pandemic, I was working on this project in Beijing, and it's for these new twin towers. And, you know, they're buildings that are certainly looking at resilience and sustainability with operable facades for airflow. And, you know, the client wanted to integrate some technology into the whole entry experience. And I remember going through it, you know, because it's nearing completion. And, you know, you walk in and you go through towards security. Security knows it's you, knows that you sit on the 20th floor and the gates open, the elevator open, and it whisks you away and you don't touch anything. And before the pandemic, I was thinking, this is a little odd. But now I'm like, this is great. You know, you think about it, it's like, I don't have to touch anything, right? And you're able to go through and move through in a way that you're still having a spatial experience, and you're still able to, you know, have kind of that promenade from outdoor to indoor, but you're doing it in a way where you're not interacting with the surfaces in the same way that you normally would have. And actually it's safer.
What deep-seated behavioral and cultural impact might this global pandemic have on what customers and clients will want or expect, both from designers and from manufacturers in the years to come?
The whole idea of climate action that was really, you know, a strong message pre-pandemic will probably take on post-pandemic, maybe a broader notion of climate wellness. And that our clients will look to us and want to know, like, how are we doing something that is truly, for the good, and that's for the good of the climate, but also for the good of human experience, and creating, places and spaces that are, resilient in all senses of the word. And I think that's a huge opportunity for all of us in the profession to really take advantage of, and use that as a call to action.
How do we create beautiful environments with physical objects, particularly in the case of finished materials, when what we have to work with is the internet? There's such subtlety in the physical materials that we actually are selecting to create beautiful environments, that we have to rely on a higher quality camera or a higher quality resolution to try to get the subtlety of the beauty into the soup or the stew to make something beautiful in which people can work or live or thrive. So I think that'll be that's another interesting challenge.
I just say a couple of random ideas. We're working on those tensions and boundary, and we've all dealt with this before, that if people want to close off or create boundary, it creates other problems, like blocks the light, takes up space, it's awkward. And so there's a tension there about, I want division, but I also still want light and connectedness and collaboration. And so there's a meaty little problem for us to get after on that one. And then there's this whole back to the office thing. We were playing around with this idea already of, what would you trade to get back the door? There was something symbolic about the threshold of an old office door that would allow people to say how busy they were. I'm halfway busy, I'm all the way busy, I'm open for business, right? So we'd been playing around with the idea of, well, how much real estate would I have to shift out of an open plan station in order to be able to afford to get my walls back and my door back? And it seems like this might be the tipping point to push interest into that in a new way. What will be different this time, we think, is what people like WeWork figured out, that as you made the little offices smaller, you would start to complain about the acoustics more and more and more. But if you make them entirely glass, there's no false perception of who's sitting right beside you 4 feet away, because you can see them. So the magic was to make them all glass above the belt. And so now you can start to get back the door, but you are okay with poor acoustics potentially, and you're okay with some other things like it's small. But this desire to cave off will probably be pretty real for a lot of people, and we'll see it as sneeze guards initially.
No one has a crystal ball, but what is your outlook on business prospects?
Great question.
In the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months?
I think we're going to see it in a very different pace by industries. I think that, we may find that the retail and hospitality industries are coming back slower, and that may be different in different parts of the world. I think in the commercial, office world, I think there is going to be that return to the office. But what does that mean? I think that equation may look different in terms of, we were talking about earlier about how people feel sensitivity towards density and towards space and amenities and so forth. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, but it definitely feels like it will be different by industry type and by building type.
Our current workload, about 5% globally have projects stopped, which is a remarkable number in many ways. And also only probably less than another 5% have gone on hold. I'm not sure what that says for the overall market. Maybe it's just that the market segments that we work in are a little more stabilized than others. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I'm optimistic about what that's going to mean for not only our business, the profession of architecture.
We don't know. We'll know when our customers get back to work. We'll know then. Right now, it's a little too early for us to tell. But on a personal level, I hope this counts as our recession, so we can get that behind us.
That's a good point.
And then folks growing up.
Let's count this one as it.
That's a good comment.
Only thing I can share is, much like Jordan, we looked at our China business. we're fortunate. We've got a great market share in Southern China and Hong Kong. And so we were down 20-30% for almost 3 months before it hit the bottom. And so if that kind of gives you a feel for kind of scale of that, we're fortunate. Our industry has a lag cycle to it. They're already building the building. So, but we're probably seeing a late fall, winter, where we start seeing the real bad stuff happen. And there's some variables on the horizon we're tracking. There's a good variable. One variable is that there's a belief that the gig economy will be under pressure after this, and that people who experienced unemployment and no insurance will be attracted to large corporations for job security again.
How can designers and manufacturers partner together now and then post-pandemic to create a safer, healthier world? And how does the dialogue between them need to change or adjust?
I think this unprecedented time is creating a canvas for new types of partnerships and new ways of working. But post-pandemic, I think it sets up really in an interesting way for manufacturers and designers and design firms to partner together to solve some of the things we talked about earlier, just to create that trust in the built environment. And the opportunities for the places and spaces that we go into, that they can, the building components, the furniture, the finishes can all work together to promote a level of engagement that everyone can feel comfortable with. It can be inspirational and it can be safe.
Workplace is evolving much, much faster. The way in which people work is evolving much faster than most manufacturers can produce product. This situation that we're facing right now is the call to change the process of manufacturing, to be able to respond immediately to what's happening in this world. All of the larger scale projects that we've been working on, there has been customization of either standard products or invention of new products to be able to address that issue. Now the question is, how can you bring it to the market faster? It has to become much faster. So the question is, in the process of design and production, what can happen to make it occur faster? Okay, we all know BIFMA testing takes blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of bureaucratic potholes to navigate, but how can all of this be navigated in a different way, in a different fashion, to be able to address more immediate needs?
There's this hybrid of ability to rapidly tailor combined with mass production. So in some of the West Coast recent ones, that combination, there's a fine line I'm trying to figure out of where, from a sustainability standpoint, I kind of cross a line to make just disposable furniture nonstop, which is a bit of what's happened in the West Coast. It's all disposable, to some extent, because the leases are shorter, the expectation of life cycle is shorter. And so where's that fine line between the two, where we're adding value and not just creating disposable? There's plenty of people that can do disposable. That's not the business I want to play in, but I want to do the tailoring and the bespoke. And so we're trying to figure that magic line out right now.
In our business, in the last 3 weeks, we've taken 1/3 of our production workforce on a volunteer basis, and now they're making hospital beds with Stryker Medical, who's also located in Kalamazoo for the crisis. We've got our engineering product development teams creating 3D printed head systems to hold face shields. We're building body shields for people that are in service industries to shield them from germs. So yes, it can be done. You can switch over quickly, but the business case that has to be there and has to be made. And 10% of our overall business is, I would say, kind of brand-driven, high-end custom projects. Our business is really about mass production, but we're seeing an uptick in these kind of high-end custom large projects, which is interesting.
From our perspective, definitely, I think Amazon has put added pressure on everybody from a manufacturing point of view, because the long lead times is not being accepted anymore. And I think that's because Amazon has kind of changed everybody's mentality. Now they think they can get everything, relative quick. So I think modular system, trying to create modular systems where you have good flexibility, can definitely help you go pretty far. So a lot of it, you have the components, ready available, and then you have the delayed configuration. That's certainly what has helped us.
What are you most hopeful about professionally, and what have you learned personally from this experience?
I think there's definitely a new sense of camaraderie, not only our morning touch bases, figuring out what we're working on, who's working on what project, how things are moving along business-wise, but also a true, sincere check-in with the employees on how they're doing. Do they have food? Do they have toilet paper? So definitely a more heart-to-heart and realization with these colleagues. I think that's one thing I've noticed.
It's really interesting, this kind of camaraderie. I imagine it was like wartime era, we're all in it together doing stuff. That's pretty special to watch happen right now. Whether it's making face shields or masks or just people caring about each other. That's hopefully going to spill over into a new generation of what the work expectations are, what workers do these days. It goes back to that bigger than sustainability. It's about well-being in a big way that we haven't seen before. Could be really cool.
I guess I would add that from a hopeful standpoint, I'm hopeful that this is an amazing call to action for architecture and just, the industry itself. So architects, designers, manufacturers and partners in the industry to come together and realize that we have this opportunity to truly shape our communities and the future of our cities in a way that can make them stronger, better, healthier places for people to come together.
I might go on and say, for me personally, providing leadership to all of the folks who are dependent on me personally, dependent on me, to bring in the work and sustain the process of making sure that everyone has something to do that's efficient and productive and satisfying, and to be able to make sure also that people's lives are comfortable and their families feel comfortable, so that as we move through this, if you don't have if I as a leader provide any potential cracks in this that causes disruption to people's lives, that's my responsibility to deal with. And I don't want that to happen at all. I want people to be comfortable and happy and productive.
I think that, nothing brings people together better than a common enemy. And this, and what I see out of our people is really inspiring. I'm pretty inspired by their behavior and their support for the organization and each other. In a normal work week, there might be office squabbling about so-and-so and this and that. And now we don't have that. We'll have a virtual happy hour on Friday at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And I thought, well, maybe a few people will show up for a few minutes and then leave. The attendance of that thing is 100%, and people stick around for an hour or longer, or an hour and a half or longer, or well into the evening. And I'm just really pleased with that. And I feel like our people are getting more done from home than I would have ever imagined, including myself. But I think overall, for me, it's going to be a period of opportunity. And this should be an opportunity for designers to really kind of flex and show us what they're made of, and our organization included. I'm really hoping we take this as an opportunity to evolve and grow.
I think we are learning and we're learning to set new standards for ourselves, and there'll be new standards, for the future. And I think that's, I think it's a good challenge for us. And I think some of the older generation here, we're learning what the younger generation actually has been using. So I think it's been quite rewarding in a sense for that. So, but I'm hopeful that everybody comes out of it safe, and we there'll be a new day tomorrow, and I think there'll be new challenges in the future.
So I would love to thank you all very, 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 very much. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your intelligence.
Good seeing everyone, and thanks for hosting.
Yes, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you well.